Hello, everyone. Welcome to 1.5 Degrees, the podcast where together we explore the science, solutions, and stories involved in the fight against climate change. I'm your host, Heidi Pan, speaking with the professionals behind the latest research, policies, culture, and innovations shaping our response to global environmental challenges. For today's episode, we are incredibly honored to be joined by Robyn James, who is the Director of Gender and Equity for the Nature Conservancy's Asia Pacific Division, to discuss her work at TNC in achieving equal inclusion for women and others in conservation, resource management, and science, and the necessity of addressing discriminatory systems with a social justice lens in the face of climate change and other environmental challenges. For over 25 years, Robyn has led collaborative, equitable, and inclusive conservation work with communities in more than 20 countries, from Australia to Papua New Guinea and the Solomon Islands, and is currently undertaking her PhD on women in conservation at the University of Queensland School of Social Sciences. Robyn, it's truly an honor. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks, Heidi. So it's a pleasure to be with you today and meet you, and I'm looking forward to this conversation that we're going to have today. So thank you.
Yeah, no, you do a lot of really incredible work, so I'm really excited to kind of delve into the topics that I kind of, touched upon in the intro there. But I guess to start, could you please tell us more about, I guess, the work that you're doing, and what being a director of gender and equity entails exactly?
Thanks, Heidi. Yes, I'm the Director of Gender and Equity in Conservation for the Asia Pacific. What does that mean exactly? It's a fairly convoluted title, I guess. But in essence, it's really around ensuring that the Nature Conservancy, which is the world's largest environmental NGO, that our work around conservation and climate, which is our mission, is equitable. So what does that mean? It means that it's fair and just, and that any work that we do doesn't unfairly harm or disadvantage people who need the resources that we're working with to for their livelihoods. And it's also about ourselves. So how do we ensure that conservation and climate work, the teams that are working on this are equitable, that we have every person that wants to pursue a career in conservation or climate has an opportunity to work with us and to excel in our workplaces. So it's really about the work, making sure our conservation work does no harm at the minimum, and the maximum it's completely gender equitable, and that people all have a say in the resources that they most depend on and decide what happens. And it's also about our workplaces just as much, that our workplaces are fair and just, and every single person can achieve their potential. So it's two things really, ourselves and the work.
Yeah, no, I like that you kind of categorize it into two kind of aspects of diversity and equity and inclusion. I think that I guess I'm very curious about how, because there's many ways that the Nature Conservancy does this, but how do you, I guess, what are some ways that you integrate gender and equity considerations into conservation and research work, and also, I guess, like employment?
I guess for me, it can be overwhelming. So a lot of conservation and climate staff in the sector, this isn't what they think about daily. They often come from a physical science background, so climate science or biology or marine ecology, things like that. And so the social hasn't always been forefront for this sector. And so it's really, my role is to really try to push us to understand climate and conservation as social issues, not so focused on the physical or the environmental. So we really have to understand that it's about decisions we make as governments, as communities, as researchers, all shape this. So it's really a social issue. And so the thing I try to help our organization and understand as a workplace is to see what's happening. So for me, as a social scientist, I'm super interested in like how our staff are feeling, and so looking at we do a workplace survey, an annual workplace survey every year around how people are going and progressing in their career, and I've done separate surveys around this, and then we gender disaggregate that data. So that what I mean is that we look at it from man, woman, and people that identify as non-binary, and just to really understand, is there differences in how you're progressing in your career, how you're understanding conservation, how you're contributing depending on your gender, and then working out ways of how to address that. So without the data, it's really difficult because you're always just going on a hunch. And so for me, it's really important that first we ask the question. So we need diverse leadership, diverse people to think about this as more than a physical science issue. And then we ask the question, and then when we understand the question or get everybody to kind of contribute, then we can start working with the people who are most impacted to develop solutions. And then we do the same with our conservation work. So instead of, for example, saying we're going to help or support or work with X number of people or communities, we're like, well, who are those people? Who are those communities? Like, they're not a homogenous group. So for me, kind of working with our organization so that all our work is disaggregated, so we understand, are women actually at the table on this decision around a resource? Are they having any say? Are they just there making the food, or are they contributing to a decision around conservation? So collecting data around this, recognizing it's a problem, using all the resources we already have, like global research into where each country's at on gender equity and other issues around social development, and then measuring and adjusting and working with our teams to address any issues that arise.
Yeah, no, I think that it's very interesting when you're talking about the work that you do. It's very much measuring something that's like social impact. So it's kind of, I guess, like in my mind, it seems very difficult to like quantify that in any ways. It's very much like qualitative data that you would work with. So I guess, like, how would you measure the kind of success, I guess, or effectiveness of gender and equity programs and initiatives?
I think numbers are what people love in science, and working with systems that to understand that qualitative data is just as important as quantitative. So for me, I'm always keen to understand the qualitative and the quantitative. So, we get an understanding. For example, we did some research into who's publishing at TNC, so at the Nature Conservancy. So we're, the world's largest global environmental organization. We pride ourselves on using science to guide our decisions. So I wanted to understand who are the scientists that are publishing and deciding our research. And so you use a quantitative mechanism to understand the gender, the location of all the people that have published at our organization for the last 50 years. So we have a number that speaks to people. So we understand that, less than 3% of our published scientists are women located in the global south. That's not okay. Like, we have to change that. But then we use qualitative data to understand, like, what are the barriers? Like, we know some of the global barriers, but what are the barriers? And so doing qualitative research to understand these unique barriers that women are facing, and then developing a project to address those barriers. So I'm always nervous if we just use quantitative data, because if we reduce everything to a number, we don't often get to the nuance and to the diversity of thought that helps us develop solutions.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I think like so often we do, I mean, numbers, they're very flashy, and so obviously they're very important, as you said, to focus on, but also it's a social and complex and nuanced issue, so that definitely needs to incorporate like qualitative stuff. So that was a really interesting example that you gave. I do definitely want to, I guess, like break down what sort of challenges exactly that women in conservation are facing for sure. Like actually we kind of started talking about this like a very kind of specific niche of this aspect like before we started recording like and the Nature Conservancy has this like gender decoder, obviously a very small part of the kind of work that you do, but I guess I want to start talking about that in terms of like what are kind of language barriers as well. That was interesting to learn about for the first time for me.
Yeah, I mean, I think the more you understand about equality and inequity, and like we can focus on gender today because it's it's across every country that we work in. It's a global a global issue. It's like the the language that we use is gendered, and I don't think people often understand that. So if we, for example, think about what are some of the barriers to women in conservation, and then we look at the very first level, like how do you actually even get a job at a conservation NGO or conservation organization. And so then we look at, like, let's look at the job applications or the way conservation NGOs are talked about, not job applications, job advertisements.
Mm.
And we can run a gender decoder, or it's like a tool to understand language. And then there's masculine and feminine language. So if we think about, we have unconscious bias, so we're automatically conditioned from birth to
Mm.
have kind of these aspects that we assign as man or woman. And all of us have them because we're culturally conditioned. In every culture, we're conditioned from birth. It's not our fault. It's just unconscious bias
Mm.
that what the cultural kind of norms that we attribute to being a man or a woman or non-binary. And then, so if you look at that, it's around language, and that's how we communicate. So masculine language that we will implicitly and unconsciously assign to man is things like competitive, achieving, goal oriented, action. All these sort of words are very masculine, like we unconsciously will attribute them to being a man. And then woman are things like caring, nurturing, team focus, collaborative, partner. So these sort of different
Mm.
words. And so if you look at a job description, often for a conservation role, it'll be all about like getting results, like surveying, field, all these sort of things. And subconsciously, you will think, oh, that's jobs for a man, marine scientist, or something like that. And it will, other people with really different diverse skills or different genders subconsciously won't think that that organization or that role's for them. So I'm kind of thinking about this all the time. Like even when we look at, I like for instance checked our new strategic plan for our region and did a kind of a gender check on the language to make sure it's inclusive for
Mm.
everybody. So that's just a small example of kind of these unconscious biases we all have, that can influence how we get ahead in our careers.
Yeah, no, I mean, the thing about gender and inclusivity is it's definitely like I bring this up a lot that it's like a social issue, so it affects like kind of everything from employment to education. And I guess like you've also mentioned that like there are definitely a lot of aspects to this kind of issue. I guess from your perspective, what are some of the most pressing gender inequity issues that still need to be addressed in conservation, and what are the solutions or changes that you hope to see implemented to address those in the next few years?
I think I think some of the pressing issues for me is to really actually say this is an issue and it's core to our progress. Like, I feel like urgency often trumps the social aspects of conservation. So, and this is way beyond my organization, I'm talking about the sector as a whole. It's like we are all really anxious about climate and the biodiversity crises, and understandably so, but we can't let that urgency trump equity, in my opinion. Like, we have to do it in a way that's equitable. And that means that it might mean we go a little slower, but that equity piece and the gender equity piece, it cannot be excluded because we feel there's a crisis. And it's just not going to be as effective if we do that anyway. It might be okay short term, but it's not going to lead to long-term benefits. So for me, that is the biggest issue I feel that we have to face, this idea that we can do environmental and climate work without the social side of it being really completely integral.
Yeah, I mean, like, I think that it's interesting you mentioned that, like, crisis tends to trump this aspect of conservation. It's like an aspect of conservation that is there even if we don't talk about it as much as we should. And so, I mean, it seems like it's kind of an integral part of the puzzle piece in terms of like solving this crisis. Like, we can't really solve the crisis as like, I guess, effectively as we can without, having all women and minorities included in the work that we do. So, I mean, again, really important work, gender and inclusivity. And I do also want to, like, I guess for listeners, clarify the term like equity. Like, in the past, I think you've mentioned in your work that there's a distinction between equality and inclusion. So I guess, like, what would you say are the differences between these three terms in practice?
I think when we talk about equality, so that kind of, if we look at baseline equality, it's about giving everyone the same things. So if you think about, there's a picture of people trying to look over a fence to watch a sporting game, and so if we give everyone a box so that they can stand on it to look over this fence to watch a game or whatever, some people aren't still going to be able to access it. So the able-bodied taller person can climb on the box and see, or they don't even need the box because they can already see over the fence. Whereas someone who's using a wheelchair or a very small child, the box is useless to them. So the small child gets on the box, they still can't see over the fence because it's not tall enough, and the person who's using a wheelchair can't get on top of the box. So equity is the next step around really ensuring that we tailor things so people have what they need to succeed. So some people won't need anything. So, they're like, well, I'm tall enough to see over this fence. I don't need anything extra. So we can use those resources for someone else. The small child needs 3 boxes and they can stand on that and see over the fence. The person in the wheelchair might need a ramp up to something taller. So that's what we mean. So that's equity, when everybody has what they need to succeed. And that's when you get true equality. So equality at that first level is just giving everyone the same thing, and it's not going to be the right thing for heaps of people, and it's more than what some people need. Equity is when we give people what they need to succeed. And inclusion is really, I think about it as being when people feel completely part of, accepted and part of an organization. So you might get everything you need, but you still don't really feel part of it. You're not part of decisions. You're not really made to feel welcome. Whereas true inclusion is when everyone has what they need to succeed, and there's a culture of we want everyone to do the best they can. So that's how I think about it. That's kind of in simple terms of how I think about it when I'm thinking about those three terms.
Yeah, no, definitely. I think it's interesting that these terms are very much so a part of like our conversations about what solutions to addressing gender inequality, like what those solutions would look like. So I guess like with the work of the Nature Conservancy and the Asia Pacific part of the Nature Conservancy, how are like what are I guess some of your favorite strategies or approaches to ensuring that meaningful inclusion and like effective engagement and participation of women and other marginalized groups in conservation projects?
I guess, Heidi, if we tie it back to that the first questions that you're asking me about around qualitative versus quantitative data and understanding the situation, and then adapting what we need for people for it to be equitable and inclusive. So if we look at that publishing data, less than 3% overall of women in the global south are published authors at TNC, and that graph isn't really changing too much. So for me, that's like that needs a specific understanding and support to change that. Like it's not changing itself over time. And so for me, asking women in that group, what do you need to succeed? So that's where you get to the qualitative and looking at other research, and then so what we found isn't necessarily what you would interpret from just looking at the numbers. So women, and it wasn't until they started working with us that they even realized what some of the barriers were. So what we did was engaged a mentor from one of the universities here to work with women specifically through the whole publishing process. So women told us that they're intimidated by the process of publishing, particularly in a different language. Like English is not the first language of many of our teams and staff and scientists that want to publish. So working with someone to take the labor out of that. So there's so much labor in writing in a different language that adds so much time, so much thought, so much emotional energy that we wanted to try and support women to take that some of that labor out. And the other thing that happened when we engaged this mentor to work with the women who wanted to publish, and this is a project that's going on now, it's really, really dear project to me because it's really trying to listen to people's needs and address them, is that women felt they didn't realize how confidence is such an issue for them. So they immediately assumed they weren't good enough to publish. They didn't have enough data. They didn't have a great argument, just, all this stuff. And that's really about trying to publish in a really male-dominated system and publishing world, which is really male. And that gets back to that gender language as well. And so what the role of this mentor is, and we picked our mentor very carefully. So she'd been a mentor for me for a long time, so I knew how incredibly careful she is and caring and supportive. So a big part of her role has been to really support women in their confidence that they're amazing, because no one's telling them they're amazing, but they are amazing. So like that is a big kind of part of this process, which may not come out in quantitative data. So that this is a really, really important project to us. And I think it's going to hopefully start changing our stats on women in publishing. So that's one small example. There's many more.
Yeah, no, I mean, something like it honestly sounds kind of like simple when you speak of confidence, but that's truly such an important aspect of like ensuring that, people stay motivated to like feel that they can be a part of conservation work, I think. And so yeah, no, it's really awesome that you have a mentor system that's kind of like in process, and hopefully that does have some positive impact, and I'm sure it will. I do want to also ask, so like we had gone through some of like barriers in employment. In your writing, you've also mentioned that the kind of like barriers can also start in terms of um, education as well. And you yourself have worked in the field of like academia and education as a lecturer. So I guess like from your perspective, is there like, do you see potentially the access to resources and discrimination in education alleviating in the near future? And I guess how would we incentivize that change to, begin soon?
I mean, I think it's country specific. So different countries have different are making different progress towards their goals of education, the millennium and goals around education. So I think it's super specific to the country that you're working in. But I would say that in terms of conservation, it's a huge barrier for people in communities or in remote places or who are marginalized due to their gender, that's a really significant barrier to people being involved. And then I guess for me, education is a real equity issue. And that's the thing that I noted when I first started working at the Nature Conservancy, is that the community work that I was part of in the Pacific Islands, etc., it's so much of it people don't have access to knowledge. And so when you don't have access to knowledge through no fault of your own, you're in a complete disadvantage straight away. So we're working in places in the Pacific Islands where like there's the lowest rates of access to the internet in the world. But some of the highest pressure on extractive industries is to be a pillar of the economy. So you can imagine that creates a real issue, because you have mining companies and other extractive industries going into communities and asking them to come on board around mining or logging, whatever it is, but people don't have access to information to even understand what this is all about. So for me, it's such a barrier to equitable natural resource management as well as conservation and climate. But so we've done one of the equity projects that I'm really feel has been an excellent work that's ongoing, is that we were working in the remote parts of Solomon Islands where mining is really, really emerging as a cornerstone for the economies. And so, but women came to me and others just saying, look, we don't understand even what a mine is, let alone what it's going to do for us or what damage it's going to cause. And we just don't understand. And all our land's being signed away. And we just feel helpless about it.
Yeah.
And so we worked with the women and experts in mining and law and environmental impacts of extractives, etc., a whole bunch of people, to develop an awareness program around mining and its impacts for communities across Solomons, who were grappling with this issue. And so it's around education. So like really simple awareness program. It was done, there's no electricity in all the places where we're working, so we did it on big silk banners so people could use it without electricity. So it's all just printed, waterproof, so you can take it in boats. There's often no roads where we work. And the women themselves trained each other to be community facilitators. So all of it, there's scores of languages in Solomon Islands, so it could be done in local language in whatever village. There was a community of women that were on board to do this. And that program's been going for nearly 10 years now, and just tens of thousands of people have benefited from this. And they've also been able to then have the language and the tools to influence the national minerals policy for Solomon Islands, because we could support the women to articulate what they would need for a sustainable, or if there's such a thing, mining industry. And so that's around not so much even formal education, it's around the conservation sector understanding that like people are at an extreme disadvantage because of the systems that they happen to be born in, and it's not, they need information, and they need information that we can use our resource as a well-resourced organization to share with people so that they can make informed decisions. So they might choose mining or they might not, but at least they've got the information to make a more informed decision and hopefully get a better outcome for the environment and for social issues, because they understand what they need. So
Yeah.
that's an education example.
No, I mean, I think that that's really awesome that you like, use the resources from the Nature Conservancy to be able to do that work. Because I mean, it's not like the miners or land extractioners are going to be educating the people that they're going to possibly be negatively impacting, and help them make a well-informed decision. So yeah, no, there's that gap of like education that really needs to be filled. What advice, I guess, would you give to individuals or organizations that are looking to better integrate gender and equity considerations into their own conservation efforts or other environmental work?
I would say there's 3 things that organizations should start with, and then they can build on that. So first is to understand the context that you're working in, so the social and gender context. So you don't go in to work somewhere without understanding the social context. Like, you can't just focus on the conservation or the climate issue, it's the social context. You have to understand that. Even the basics, you just need to understand like what is going on here, and a lot of that information is available by doing a lit review or whatever to start with, and then you build on that. But you can't go in there just focusing on a conservation or climate problem as a scientific issue or a biological issue. Like, you have to. And then the other thing I'll repeat, I can't emphasize enough, is you just need to disaggregate anything. Like, you really need to understand who is part of your issue, who is part of the problem, who is going to be most impacted by any decision you make. Are they there? And that's within your own teams as well as the work. So really making sure you have diversity of thought, diversity of decision making, and the people who are most impacted by your decision are there. And then the third one, I think, is to just keep revisiting and measuring and understanding what you're doing with qualitative and quantitative methods, and then change. Like, you're not going to have the answer at the beginning. I think we get fixed on these ideas that we know where we're heading, and then we don't want to deviate,
and we have like a quick
course
solutions.
It's like I can't know what is going to happen tomorrow, and it's okay if something happens tomorrow that changes everything and we have to reset our course, or we understand things better, and we have to be humbled enough to change what we're doing, so that those who are most impacted by anything are able to really take the lead in telling us that this isn't working and we need to change it. So yeah, they're the things I really think about a lot.
That's like really great advice, and very, I guess, like comprehensive in just 3 aspects. And the aspect of like obviously understanding what it is that you're working within is so important, and something that's not really considered often or prioritized enough. So yeah, thank you for highlighting that. So I guess this next question is also kind of advice related. I wanted to ask, so if you could turn back time, but butterfly effects aside, what is some advice that you might give to yourself who is kind of stepping into the work that you're doing now?
Oh my goodness. I mean, I think the standard advice for women is to back yourself. Like, you're working in a system that's inequitable.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not designed for you. And then there's the intersectionality of that. So people are further disadvantaged by ethnicity, race, nationality, access to education, socioeconomic status, all these things. It's not designed, so it's not you. So I think being able to separate the fact, oh, okay, well, this is how the system's meant to work. It's meant to work so that I don't have this opportunity. So not trying to take it, not feeling you're a failure or you have imposter syndrome. Of course you have imposter syndrome because this isn't designed for you. It's not your fault. And finding women sponsors pretty early, I think, is if you can find a woman who really believes in you, a tribe of women, hopefully. But I would say that's something that I would wish I'd been more deliberate about and done earlier, because you need to know that, I don't know, it's just really helpful if you know people have gone before you and they're like, oh yeah, that's okay, keep going. So yeah, I would say those two things. But other than that, I mean, I don't try to think too much. Like, things have happened and everything's been a learning experience, I guess. So for me, kind of just try to use every opportunity as get the most out of it and use it as a learning opportunity, even sometimes the things that haven't gone well. There's been enough of those. But yeah, just using them as a learning opportunity.
No, I mean that's really great advice. Thank you so much for that. And also I guess like if there's someone who's currently facing discrimination in conservation or other environmental or just I guess spaces in general, do you have any I guess like resources that you might recommend that someone could access to better their circumstances?
Yeah, I mean, some of the work we've published, I think, is really helpful, and we can put that up on the YouTube channel. But just to help you understand that you're not alone, and that this is a pervasive issue across climates, conservation, all sectors. It's not unique, and it is pervasive. And I mean, I'm working with my own organisation to address some of these stats as we stand now. But we also have other guidance that I can share with you around the connection between gender-based violence and conservation, and what to do when you're, when you're confronted with that. So I can share a lot of that, the resources that we're developing that might be useful to others outside of my organisation and maybe even outside of the sector.
Yeah, no, that would be really great. When it's available, I'll be sure to, I guess, provide it down below, description, whatever, wherever that is. And I guess to kind of close off, if listeners want to keep up with the work that you're doing with the Nature Conservancy, where can they find you?
Yeah, I think the best place to find me is to follow me on LinkedIn. So I'm pretty committed to trying to share our work as regularly as possible on LinkedIn. So yeah, if you follow me on LinkedIn, I'm committed to kind of keeping on sharing where things we find, things we see, things we're doing, resources that might be of use. So that would be my recommendation.
Awesome. Yeah, I will be sure to link that as well. But yeah, no, thank you so much, Robyn, for being here today. I truly learned a lot from this conversation. And I again really thank you for the work that you're doing in this work. It really is an issue that we need to talk about more, for sure.
And yeah, thank you so much, Heidi. I mean, this initiative is super exciting as well, and I just love seeing diverse voices talking about climate and conservation, because the methods, the things that got us into this mess aren't going to get us out of it. So the more people that we can have talking about this, thinking about it differently, the better chance we have for saving our beautiful planet. So thank you so much for all you're doing, Heidi.
Thank you so much.